All right, let's begin. Topic today, the war against the Islamic Republic and mixed messages from the White House. So, we have this impression now that uh, the United States is back to waging war. Um, that said, Trump himself, even Marco Rubio, has stated that they are open to negotiations. And if Iran would be serious about negotiations, um, it's possible that a deal could be struck. And it appears that talks are ongoing almost on a daily basis. And perhaps American negotiators are not speaking directly with the Iranian negotiators. In all likelihood, these talks are going through the mediators of Pakistan and Qatar, but they do seem to be talking. So we're in a strange place where every evening the United States takes out some Iranian targets. I think last night's fighting lasted only about an hour, but nonetheless, targets were struck. Iran strikes as well, hitting uh, their neighbors in the Persian Gulf, typically targeting U.S. military installations in the Persian Gulf, and that's where we're at. But I want to really begin by discussing J.D. Vance's interview just a few days ago, last week with Joe Rogan. And when we talk about mixed signals, this signal was, the most mixed of all. If you want to get tough on Iran, this is not the message you want to be sending. Okay. And J.D. Vance made a few different claims that I want to get into here. First of all, he said that the ceasefire and specifically the memorandum of understanding that the United States signed with Iran failed. J.D. Vance says it failed because of elements uh, within the Israeli government that blew up the deal. And he makes the claim that these elements in the Israeli government have been paying for a social media campaign that was criticizing the deal. And ultimately, it's these criticisms by elements in the Israeli government, uh, paid for by elements in the Israeli government, that led to the failure of the deal. Now, he offered absolutely no evidence for this. It's obviously not true, right? The deal failed because Iran broke the deal by firing at ships traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. So it was J.D. Vance giving misinformation, disinformation on the Joe Rogan show. Now, has there been a social media campaign by the Israeli government? There has been, but it had nothing to do with the memorandum of understanding or the ceasefire. The social media campaign that Israel is just beginning is to combat the anti-Semitism that is sweeping through the United States and sweeping through the world. Okay. And Israel has been heavily criticized by many Israel supporters by largely doing nothing and sitting back and watching this explosion in anti-Semitism, blow up throughout the world, and Israel hasn't been doing anything. So finally, the Israeli government decided to hire someone to try to combat this anti-Semitism that is going through Facebook, going through X, going through TikTok. So they've just begun this campaign to push back a little bit. It's clearly not being very successful, but that's the only thing the Israeli government has done. They have done nothing to no social media campaign whatsoever to criticize the ceasefire or the memorandum of understanding. But anyway, Vance makes this claim. The second thing Vance claims is that Epstein was linked to both the CIA and the Mossad. And he says Epstein was linked to the highest levels of the CIA and Mossad. And once again, he offers absolutely no evidence to back up this claim, right? And this is a claim that's been made for a long, long time. Again, no one has offered any evidence whatsoever, nothing concrete. Uh, Personally, I think it's very far-fetched that the intelligence community, either the CIA or the Mossad, would would use someone like Epstein, such an unstable and dirty figure like Epstein, to work for them. That's not, at least it's not the Mossad style. But anyway, he throws out again this claim that fosters anti-Israel sentiment, that fosters anti-Semitism, and again with absolutely zero evidence. This is the Vice President of the United States making these claims on Joe Rogan without offering an iota of evidence. Now, following this interview, okay, it's interesting to note in the days that followed this Joe Rogan interview, Iranian state media mentioned J.D. Vance hundreds of times in a very positive light, praising him, while at the same time attacking Israel and President Trump. In fact, they praised Vance far more than they praised the Iranian president or any other leader of Iran. Okay. I heard a political analyst from the United Arab Emirates say that we have a saying in the Middle East that if the Islamic regime in Iran loves your position, you're probably doing something very wrong. And if it hates your position, you're probably doing something 100% right. So take it from the UAE. The fact that the Iranian state TV, which is run by the IRGC, if they're praising J.D. Vance over and over and over again, you know he did something very, very wrong. Now, let's get into this a bit more, okay? So J.D. Vance refuses to recognize that the ceasefire and the memorandum of understanding failed because he, the negotiators, and the Trump administration at large misjudged Iran, right? Vance in particular, since we're on the topic of Vance, let's stick to Vance. He said that the Iranian people that he was negotiating with were completely reasonable. And he said that it was amazing that he and the negotiating team were meeting face to face with the Iranians, and he was very confident that a deal would be reached. Okay, these are all things that J.D. Vance has said in the last couple of weeks. Now, the reason why the ceasefire and the memorandum of understanding failed was because obviously there was nobody on the other side that Vance and the team of U.S. negotiators, there was no one on the other side that was negotiating seriously. Okay. They were actually negotiating not with reasonable people, they were negotiating with fanatics, and they completely misread those that they were negotiating with. But instead of admitting the truth, right, what does J.D. Vance do? He looks to blame. And who does he blame? He blames the same people that Candace Owens blames, the same people that Tucker Carlson blames, the same people that Nick Fuentes blames. It's Israel and the Jews, right? So J.D. Vance is in some pretty bad company, right? He's playing the exact same game that these podcasters are playing. And that is not a good place for Vance to be. As my wife's grandmother used to say, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are, right? So, if Vance is playing the exact same game as Candace Owens is playing, blaming Israel for everything, engaging in these wild conspiracy theories, we have a pretty good sense of who J.D. Vance is. Now, Vance is accusing um, Israel of again undermining this deal, even though it's crystal clear to anybody who's just following events just a little bit, understands very well that Iran broke the deal, right? So if you're paying attention, it's crystal clear that Vance is operating in conspiracy theories, being very dishonest. The only ones that are really falling for this are the ones who are the big Tucker Carlson fans, right? And we could call these people Vance super fans, right? So they maybe refuse to see the truth, they maybe refuse to see reality, but these are the ones that might find Vance's interview with Joe Rogan appealing. But he's certainly not going to win anyone over who's already not a Vance super fan or a Tucker Carlson super fan, because it's crystal clear that Iran unilaterally tanked the deal, right? We can all see that. And Vance, again, if you're paying attention, it's clear Vance is denying reality by blaming Israel and the Jews because he's totally captivated by his own ideology. So, in my opinion, people who blame others, right? If Vance misjudged his opponent, he thought that he was on the verge of making this great deal, right? But he can't accept reality that he misread the room. He can't accept that reality. He can't hold himself accountable. Instead, again, he blames the same people that Candace Owens is doing. And in my mind, when you blame others for your failures, that makes you a loser, right? These are the things that losers do. They don't hold themselves accountable. They don't try to improve by their mistakes. They don't confront reality. Instead, they duck. They blame others, right? Again, these are the things that losers do. People who've turned themselves into victims, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's the victim of this Israeli operation, right? To any normal person who's paying attention and being honest with themselves, it makes J.D. Vance look ridiculous because he's coming up with outlandish conspiracy theories to avoid accountability. Now, this is a problem when the White House, when the Trump administration is conducting a serious war, and you need to make a case, you should be making a case to the American people of why this war is necessary. And the vice president of the United States is throwing, the model ally that the United States has, certainly in the Middle East and probably in the whole world, under the bus. That is not the way to wage a very, very serious war, right? You have your vice president undermining you at the same time that you're dropping missiles on your enemy. So you have the vice president, right? I'm going to make another point now. When Vance in this interview talked about Iran, he again referred to them as he's done in the past. The Iranian regime is comprised of hardliners and moderates, right? We have the moderates who we're dealing with, who we're having these great negotiations with. We're on the very verge of striking a long-term peace deal, but the hardliners keep undermining the deal. Now, this is the language that Barack Obama used to use. This is the language that Joe Biden used to use. There's moderates and there's hardliners. And if we could only give the upper hand to the moderates, we could have an amazing deal. Again, this is J.D. Vance demonstrating a complete lack of understanding of who his enemy is. Okay. This is the old game that the Iranians have been playing for decades. Okay. There are no hardliners, there are no moderates. They're all the same. They're all religious fanatics, they're ideologues. And there's some people who wear a suit and look nice and are able to talk to Westerners, but they want to destroy the United States. They want to destroy Israel just as much as the guys with the turbans. Okay. This is the old good cop, bad cop routine that for most people who understand Iran, they've already grown tired of this very outdated characterization of the Iranian regime, hardliners and moderates. But Vance is still operating in this outdated framework that is so detached from reality. But this is where Vance is. It shows you his naivete. It shows you his inexperience and lack of understanding for the situation. So, yes, I said Vance is naive and he lacks experience. He's the vice president of the United States. But how did he get here? How did he become the president of the United States? Well, he went to a very fine law school. He went to Yale Law School. He wrote a famous book that got turned into a great movie. He served in the Senate for about a year and a half, and then he became vice president. He's 41 years old. What does this guy know about foreign policy? He knows nothing about foreign policy. He knows nothing about Iran, right? And here he is making these pronouncements and these telling us his characterization of the Iranian regime, the hardliners and the moderates, people who we can deal with, people who are we're just about to reach a deal and transform the Middle East into this peaceful place. This 41-year-old with absolutely no experience, he's clearly taken no time whatsoever to meet with sophisticated people who have been studying this regime for years. He's operating with this naive fantasy type view of our enemy. Now, you could make the argument, right, that Vance, by operating in these conspiracy theories, that he's really just playing politics, right? And he's strictly trying to appeal to a component of the MAGA base, okay, that voted for Donald Trump, okay, that is very much anti war. You could make that case. And that Vance is just putting on an act. So, for the sake of argument, let's say that's true. Let's say Vance doesn't really believe these conspiracy theories that he's promoting, but he's purely playing politics. He's preparing for the 2028 presidential election campaign, and that's what he's doing. And he's trying to maintain this part of the base that voted for Trump, the anti-war part of the base. Now, if that's his tactic, does he know that this part of the base, they never voted Republican before? Okay. In the past, and polls show this very clearly, in the past, they either never voted before. Okay. This is a young demographic. They either never voted before or they voted Democratic. Right? They voted. If they voted, they voted for Biden. They voted for Obama. This is an angry, resentful part of our population. They feel like they've been left out of the American dream, but they're drifters, right? In all likelihood, they're not going to vote again, right? In all likelihood, they voted for either they voted for the first time in the last election or they voted for Obama and Biden in the past. Now, Vance might get them and he might not get them because these are very unmotivated voters. So maybe he'll get some of them to turn out. But guess what? He's going to lose many, many more. if he goes down this conspiracy theory type of approach to politics, right? He's going to lose a lot. A lot of people are going to just opt out of the next presidential election and say, you know what? Vance sounds a lot like his Democratic opponents. And I'm not voting for this type of guy. So, yes, maybe he'll get some of these people, but he's going to lose much more of the MAGA base. And I'm not saying they're going to vote for his Democratic opponent, but they'll just sit the election out. They just won't vote. Just like you had many Trump voters the second time Trump ran in 2020, you had a lot of Trump voters that sat it out. They were not happy with Trump towards the end of his administration, and they just sat out the vote. And if this is the path that Vance follows, he's going to end up with a large number of people who just sit the election out, even if he's able to attract some of the people that he's trying to attract with these conspiracy theories. But I would argue that Vance actually does believe these conspiracy theories. He means it. It's not just politics. Why do I think that? Because J.D. Vance has been quietly peddling these types of ideas for a long time. This is not new. And all you have to do is look at his continued close friendship with Tucker Carlson, and you know that Vance believes these ideas, right? You don't say these things over and over again if you don't believe it. At least most people don't. Again, we have this. I said this before, I'll say it again to show you what a bad place this is to be for the Trump administration. The sitting vice president is publicly alleging that members of our model ally, Israel, the only country that has fought shoulder to shoulder with us against Iran, you're arguing that they have been maliciously financing a campaign against him and against the memorandum of understanding. He offered no evidence whatsoever. He just threw it out there, right? That is so incredibly irresponsible. And it's a serious accusation. It's a very serious accusation. Now, because Israel is such a model ally, what did they do? They kept their mouth shut, right? If they launched any complaints, yes, they did come out and say it's not true, but very subtly, very quietly. And if they said anything, it was behind closed doors. If they said anything biting, anything serious, it was behind closed doors. But this is not the way you treat your model ally. And this, again, yes, it wasn't Trump saying it, but it's coming from the White House. It's coming from the vice president. This is a just horrendous way to conduct policy at any time, but especially in the middle of the war, right? And the mixed signals that this sends to the world is highly problematic. So there was a very interesting article that came out a couple of days ago, just a day after J.D. Vance did this interview with Joe Rogan. The article was published in a magazine called The Free Press. The Free Press is a relatively new magazine. It's an outstanding magazine. If anyone, if people are looking for new material to read, The Free Press, it's one of the best publications out there today. Rod Dreher wrote an article in the Free Press. Who is Rod Dreher? Well, most importantly, he's a longtime friend of J.D. Vance. They've been friends for several decades. Rod Dreher is a writer. He's written books. He writes many articles. He's appeared on many conservative podcasts. He's a conservative. He's a real pro-American, America firster nationalist. And he's a Christian. He's a religious Christian. And all along, when, J.D. Vance first started making some comments that could be interpreted as being anti-Israel, Rod Dreher was a fierce defender of J.D. Vance, a fierce defender of J.D. Vance. But that Joe Rogan interview triggered him. And he felt it important that he write an article. And he was very disturbed by the things that J.D. Vance said in this interview. And the main point of his article, was to say that the United States right now is in what he calls a Weimar moment. What's a Weimar moment? What he's saying is that in the lead up to Hitler rising to power in Germany, you had the Weimar Republic. And you started to see real strong Jew hatred emerging. And during that time, all political parties basically ignored it, right? There were parties that were behind it, but the parties that opposed it kind of kept their mouths shut. They didn't do anything. And he's warning in this article that mainstream conservatives in the United States are running the risk of repeating the mistake of the German conservatives who believed that they could either harness extremists while remaining in control, using their extremist views to their benefit, electorally, politically, but they could keep a lid on it, or they could ignore it. And he's saying, Rod Dreher saying, the conservatives right now face a Weimar moment. And especially J.D. Vance faces this Weimar moment. J.D. Vance faces a political choice. Okay, this isn't my view. This is Rod Dreher's view. And as I said, he's a longtime friend, a conservative, a Christian, and this is the case he's making. And I think it's very interesting to understand his argument. He says that Vance is caught in between trying to maintain support from this populist right-wing movement that's emerging among younger voters, right? And he could flame these conspiracy theories as he did on the Joe Rogan show, and he's done before, but very clearly on the Joe Rogan show, or he could try to push these conspiracy theories, this anti-Semitism, this anti-Israel sentiment. He could push back on it. He's facing a critical decision. And so far, Vance is choosing accommodation and even promotion of these ideas. And Dreher warns this is a very, very dangerous strategy that Vance is pursuing at the moment. He says it's not too late. Vance could change course. Remember, this is a very close friend of Vance. And this article, in many ways, is sending a warning to J.D. Vance. Watch what you're doing. History will judge you. Now, Dreher argues that Weimar Germany, it didn't descend into Nazi Germany overnight. It took time. And again, the mainstream conservatives in Germany at that time believed that they could accommodate and manage the extremists for political advantage. But eventually, what happened? The extremists eventually took over, right? Just like the extremists have taken over the Democratic Party, extremists, if you don't push back, if you don't throw water on the flames, the extremists take over. And he said it just like it happened in Germany, just like it happened in the Democratic Party, it can easily happen to the Republican Party, right? It can easily happen to the conservatives of the United States. So this is his fear, that J.D. Vance is making a similar mistake. Vance is trying to preserve the unity on the right? By bringing these extremist factions in, by embracing them, by telling them what they want to hear. But in so doing, he's flaming the extremism. Now, question is, why is he focusing on J.D. Vance? Why aren't there other Republicans in the party that could prevent the conservative movement from descending into this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel cesspool like the Democrats have done? Why is J.D. Vance the key figure in his mind? He thinks Vance is the pivotal figure because Vance has populist credentials that others like Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, we could come up with a list of other conservatives. He says Vance has the populist credentials, right? He came into national politics criticizing the old Republican Party, questioning the old foreign interventions that we've done in the past. And therefore, he has this populist appeal, right? He really is, after Trump, the face of the America First movement, right? The people who admire Tucker Carlson and are skeptical of traditional Republicans, they see Vance as one of their own, right? They don't see Marco Rubio as one of their own, right? They don't see Tom Cotton as one of their own. They see them as traditional Republicans. So it's Vance that is the one that really has the most leverage to do something about this emerging problem. He also argues that Vance is the leading contender to inherit Trump's coalition in 2028, right? And if it's Marco Rubio emerges as the presidential candidate, it's not going to be the Trump coalition. It's going to look different. It's going to look more like the old conservative coalitions. Only Vance can really inherit something that resembles more like the Trump coalition. So he is the key player. Furthermore, again, on the theme of why Vance is the key guy, because he's the one that has connections and relationships with the podcaster influencers like Tucker Carlson, he's the one that can effectively push back on them, right? If he criticizes Tucker Carlson and the things that he's saying about Jews and Israel, it's one thing, right? It'll carry much more weight. If Rubio criticizes, people will roll their eyes, right? It won't have as much impact. So it's really Vance is the one, in his view, that is the key player here. Again, if he doesn't do this, according to Rod Dreher, right? This isn't Seth speaking. I happen to agree with it. Okay, and he's actually probably making the case harder than I have, but he really believes our country could easily descend in a very, very bad direction. That's not saying, and he's not saying that we're going to have concentration camps in the United States. No. What he's saying is that this country, the political system, could become a deeply, deeply anti-Jewish political system. And when that happens, we can go through history. Anytime you see a country really turn against the Jews, bad things happen to that country because, the Jews are the first in line. They're not last in line. And the movement eventually starts to roll over everybody. The economy doesn't function. Industry doesn't function. It turns into a real societal sort of decay. And you can go around the world throughout history. It's happened everywhere. So we're in a very critical moment. And J.D. Vance, in his view, has the potential to play an absolutely critical role. Now I want to move on and pivot here more directly to the war. I was hearing, I listened to a lot of Israeli uh, podcasts and things on YouTube, and there was a great panel of Israeli generals and political and geopolitical strategists that I listened to the other day, and I want to sort of give you some of the highlights of that because it really um, gives gives us real insight into where we are right now in the war, and again the mixed messaging that we're getting out of the White House. Now, first, and I wrote this in our global macro update today. It does seem like, and this is coming out of both out of the White House, out of Israel, that Trump is about to make a very key decision. And we may be days away from it. We may be a week or so away from it, but it's coming. The Trump administration is beginning to believe that the sort of, I call it low intensity warfare that we're conducting. Why low intensity? Because we're really just trying to get them to the negotiating table, right? We're not hitting leaders, the Iranian leaders. We're not going after IRGC strongholds, right? We're not touching the IRGC. We're going after roads and bridges. We're mostly concentrating on the Iranian shoreline by the Strait of Hormuz to try to open up the Strait of Hormuz for international ships. That's where most of our attacks are focusing. But we're not really trying to defeat Iran right now, right? We're not trying to defeat them. We're trying to put them in pain to get them to be more reasonable at the negotiating table. That's the aim of the low grade warfare that we're conducting at the moment, right? It's not going for victory. It's going for victory at the negotiating table. So this is just an extension of negotiations. That's the way to see it. But it doesn't seem to be having a lot of success. So the critical decision that Trump seems to be coming to is I'm either going to really give negotiations one more chance, right? And there's a proposal that's coming out of Qatar and Pakistan that says, look, let's give negotiations a chance. Let's declare a 10-day ceasefire and let's see if we can make this happen. So that's one possibility. Now, Trump seems pretty frustrated, right? He doesn't seem that he's going to go down that route, but you never know, right? Trump is always full of surprises. One minute he's threatening to blow the leadership off the face of the earth. And the next minute, this is what happened on April 8th. He's going to wipe the country off the face of the earth. And a couple hours later, a ceasefire was declared, right? So we don't know if Trump is going to try this 10-day ceasefire gambit, or perhaps the other option is he actually goes all into this war. And if he does that, he's going to call Israel into the war. So that's where we seem to be. Okay, that's where we seem to be. Now, it's interesting, and the panel that I listened to, they noted that Iran is not touching Israel, right? They fire missiles at a lot of the Gulf countries, right? They've hit Kuwait, they've hit Bahrain, they've even hit United Arab Emirates at this point. They've hit Saudi Arabia, they've even hit Jordan, which neighbors Israel. But they don't touch Israel. They don't touch Israel. Why is that? Because they understand that the minute they fire Israel at Israel, the leadership is going to start to be taken out. And they're not ready yet to start sacrificing another line of leaders at this moment. Now, if they fired Israel, you know that they feel they've run out of options, right? They've run out of options. Their strategy isn't working. So now they're actually going for apocalypse, right? They're going for their messianic dream of bringing back their Mahdi, who's their Messiah. And the way they bring back their Messiah is through apocalypse. And they're willing to, you know, it's scorched earth strategy, go down in flames in order to bring their Messiah. They run out of all other practical options. If they strike Israel, they know that they are essentially committing suicide. Okay. They're not willing to go down that path. So far, they've left Israel out of it. And at the same time, we know that Trump isn't ready to go all in. Because if Trump were willing to go all in, he would say, come on, Israel, let's go. And he knows Israel has some very, very important, Israel has this extensive target list, right? And with this target list, according to the Israeli generals, they will absolutely devastate the Iranian regime. They'll hit leadership. They'll hit key infrastructure that will cripple the regime. They will go after the IRGC and the Basij, okay, which are the roving street gangs that are used to intimidate the Iranian people and kill the Iranian people, right? Israel, the United States may have the most powerful air force in the world, but Israel somehow has a more lethal air force when it comes to targeting Iran because of their intelligence, because of their targeting capability, right? The Israeli Air Force is capable of inflicting much more damage than the Israeli Air Force. Kind of shocking, but I've gotten that confirmed to me from various sources. When Israel gets involved, it will become much harder for the regime to continue to repress its population. Because again, Israel is going to start going after the repressive apparatus of the Iranian regime. But again, Trump has not gone down that path yet. And that tells you, it tells you everything really, right? It tells you that Trump at this moment, as of 12:45 on Wednesday, Trump has not decided that he actually wants to take down the regime. He tells you he still thinks negotiation is possible, and that's his preferred option. Okay. And when Israel does enter, if they do enter, that is telling us that Trump has actually ready to say, I'm ready to say goodbye to negotiations. Done. Let's topple this regime. Let's do it. Now, that doesn't mean he won't change his mind, right? It doesn't mean he won't change his mind. But for the moment, Trump will have made up his mind. I'm ready to go for toppling the regime. So the question is, right, what will Trump do next? Ceasefire or all-out war? Now, in his ear, you have, of course, J.D. Vance. You have Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, all pushing for negotiation. Even Marco Rubio, it's a question mark, right? It's not at all clear that Marco Rubio wants to go all into war. And I kind of doubt that Marco Rubio is making the case behind closed doors that he wants all out war. Why would Marco Rubio be reluctant? Because if all out war, could everyone please mute? I'm getting some echo here. It's not clear that Marco Rubio is advocating for all-out war behind closed doors. Why is that? Why would Marco Rubio be reluctant? He knows the Iranian regime. If there's one guy in the White House who understands that negotiations are a road to nowhere, it's Marco Rubio. In my mind, the reason why he wouldn't advocate for all-out war is because what if it doesn't work? Marco Rubio does not want to be blamed as the neocon in the room who wanted all-out war and for any failure to be blamed on him, right? It makes sense. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm reading, I'm hearing that Rubio is sort of keeping a bit quiet in these behind closed doors discussions. Now, so if the decision is made, it's going to come from Trump. Just like it was Trump who made the decision on February 28th, Trump and Trump alone made that decision to attack Iran. If we go to all out war, it's going to be Trump, right? It's not going to be his advisors pushed him into it. It's not going to be the Israelis pushed him into it. It's going to be Trump, Trump's decision. Now, if Trump makes this decision, the question is why? What is Trump seeing that other people don't necessarily recognize or aren't willing to confront? Well, Trump understands, or at least his intuition is that China is a hugely influential power broker in the Middle East, right? All over the world, China is an influential power broker. And Trump has been trying to take Chinese pieces off the board, right? Venezuela was in China's camp. And by removing Nicolas Maduro, Trump believes that now he's pulled Venezuela away from China and towards the United States. We know he's thinking about Cuba, right? If he could just get Iran done, his next target would be Cuba. Cuba, another piece on the board that's in the China camp. He'd like to pull that towards the United States. Iran, a critical, valuable piece for China, more important than Venezuela, more important than Cuba. Iran is an important piece of the Chinese global power structure. Trump thought it would be easy, right? Trump was convinced on February 28th. He was so impressed, right? He was so impressed by how easily the U.S. Special Forces removed Nicolas Maduro out of Venezuela, right? He was blown away by that. Then he was shook by Israelis' performance in the 12-day war last June of 2025. He was skeptical, right? Going into that, he didn't want Israel to do what they did. He was not on board, from what I understand. But Israel is a sovereign country, and they made their own decisions. And for 11 days, Israel ripped apart Iranian air defenses, right? They devastated Iran with unbelievable technological sophistication. Trump was blown away by that. Then on February 28th, the opening salvo of this most recent war, right? Israel, within minutes, had wiped out the Iranian leadership. He couldn't believe his eyes. So Trump was all in. He was convinced this is going to be a quick win. And in fact, his generals told him, and the Israelis actually told him, this isn't going to be so quick. But Trump didn't believe it. Trump was just so blown away by the effectiveness of the U.S. military in Venezuela and the Israeli military in Iran. He thought his gut, his instinct told him this is going to be easy. It's going to be fast. But then by April 8th, for a variety of reasons, Trump had enough, right? There were elections. We almost lost a few pilots in Iran, if you remember. Trump had enough. But according to the Israeli generals that I listened to, we were probably 3 to 4 weeks away from regime collapse. Okay? We're probably 3 to 4 weeks away from regime collapse. Let's say they were being optimistic and it was really 6 weeks away. We were there. We were on the verge of real all-out victory, but Trump had enough. Trump had enough, and he pulled the plug. And he was willing to go for negotiations. Now, that was a terrible mistake. It was a terrible mistake because in this time period, right, and the period of ceasefire has lasted much longer than the war lasted, than the all-out war lasted. Iran was able to rebuild. It was able to get new missiles, to dig missiles out from underground. It's gotten Chinese and Russian targeting assistance, right? They've really strengthened themselves during this ceasefire, during this timeout. So than being on the verge of collapse, Iran is a lot stronger today than they were on April 8th. Obviously, they're a lot weaker than they were on February 28th when we initiated the war, but they're a lot weaker than they were, and we're no longer weeks away from regime collapse, right? It's going to take a lot more than it would have from where we were on April 8th. So it was a real mistake. It was a bad judgment. But will the current approach work, right? Here's the thing. Many people believe, right? And I hear many analysts say the United States should just continue doing exactly what it's doing, right? We can gradually degrade the Iranian regime, right? We can maintain the economic squeeze, right? We've reinitiated this naval blockade, so no imports and exports can go in and out of Iran, right? So maintain that economic squeeze, continue to hit the shoreline, open up the Strait of Hormuz. And over time, we'll degrade the Iranians, degrade them. And ultimately, if we maintain it long enough, the regime will just collapse. But this type of analysis misses something very important. And I don't think anyone in the Trump administration understands what I'm about to tell you. Turkey, Pakistan and Qatar are the two mediators, right? Why we're trusting Qatar and Pakistan to be the mediators makes absolutely no sense, but they're the mediators. They, together with Turkey, are forming a bloc that undermines U.S. interests. Okay, this is a bloc of Muslim Brotherhood countries, and they are aligned with China. And their goal is to undermine U.S. interests. Okay. Turkey, Qatar, and Qatar specifically, those two countries, they see the United States and Israel as an obstacle to their grand design of controlling the Middle East, right? Turkey and Qatar have this grand design that the two countries, led by the Muslim Brotherhood, will control the entire Middle East, right? It's almost, what Iran, the leadership in Iran is Shiite, the leadership in Turkey and Qatar are Sunni, and they want to control the Middle East. Just like the Shiites in Iran want to control the Middle East, so the Muslim Brotherhood in Turkey and Qatar, they want to control the Middle East. And the only way they can do that is by pushing the US out. So they're actively attempting to undermine the United States. So what does Pakistan have to do with all of this, right? Pakistan doesn't really care so much about taking control of the Middle East. Their main enemy in the world is India, right? If you remember a bunch of months back, Pakistan and India were having a low-level war. Trump came in, he mediated and basically was able to push through a truce between the two countries. But Pakistan hates India. But they realize that they can't really defeat India unless they have the support of other countries. And Pakistan is joining with Turkey and Qatar and China to get their assistance against India. So now you have this block of countries, Turkey, Pakistan, Qatar, and China, all together trying to undermine the United States in the Middle East. Again, I don't think Trump understands this. Now, what's the best way to undermine the United States in the Middle East? By supporting Iran for the time being. So if we think that we can maintain our current policy of low-scale warfare, choking Iran off economically, we could, if it weren't for this other block of countries that's providing all kinds of assistance to Iran and propping them up, right? Propping them up with cash, propping them up with military assistance, with weapons that are being smuggled in. It's a major problem. So the only way for us to really defeat Iran is not by maintaining the status quo of low scale warfare. That won't get the job done because Iran has all this other assistance coming from this block of countries. The only way to end and really to neuter the Iranian regime is to topple the Iranian regime. Now, again, the only way to topple the Iranian regime is you got to hit them from above, right? Bring the Israelis in, pound them, while at the same time start supporting the Iranian population, helping them coordinate, providing them with arms, providing them with intelligence, all kinds of the things that the Mossad and the CIA are very, very good at doing. Again, what I just talked about, this last piece about this block of countries, Trump doesn't understand. Now, one of the countries that is also flirting with this block, right? And sometimes playing both sides. Sometimes they side with the United States. Sometimes they side with Qatar, Pakistan, and Turkey are the Saudis. And the Saudis are playing, a very shrewd game. And Trump doesn't get it either. Just yesterday, Trump signed a 30-year deal with the Saudis to help them develop nuclear power for civilian use. But we know how civilian use goes, right? Civilian use often turns into military use. Why did Trump do this? Well, probably for economic reasons. He wants to give U.S. companies an opportunity to make a lot of money going in and helping the Saudis develop nuclear energy, but probably very short-sighted. Because as far as we know, the Saudis didn't have to give anything in return. And one thing Trump had been holding as leverage is, we'll give you nuclear capabilities for civilian use if you sign a peace deal with Israel and enter into the Abraham Accords. But Trump dropped that, right? So the Saudis apparently didn't give Trump anything in return, right? Just a freebie for the purposes to help U.S. business. But this is a dangerous game because you're playing with a country that often sides with our greatest enemy, China, right? And has in the past actively undermined our interests. Let's not forget the Saudis were involved in the September 11th attacks, and they never admitted it. But we have intelligence, and I'm not only talking about that bin Laden was from Saudi Arabia, but the Saudi government was involved. Right? These are things that we know for sure. Saudis have never openly admitted it, but it's a fact. The Saudis have been on the opposite side of the U.S. in geopolitics very, very frequently. So this was a very, very shaky decision by the Trump administration. Again, the mixed messaging by the Trump administration, the lack of a grand strategic vision of what direction we're going to go. So sometimes Trump has very good instincts and he gets it right, right? Like entering the 12-day war last year to pound Iran's nuclear facilities. Awesome decision. February 8th, hitting Iran hard. Great political instincts. But he's also very short-sighted, right? And he can't take real sacrifice for very long, right? Winning difficult wars takes sacrifice. It takes toughness, protracted toughness. Maybe you have to deal with high oil prices for more than a few weeks, right? But Trump doesn't have the stomach to really, at least so far, maybe, these next few days and next couple of weeks, we're going to see Trump really surprise us and really make a name for himself in history. But you can see, the fragility of his decision making sometimes and the lack of a strategic vision. But the coming days are going to prove critical, right? The coming days are going to prove critical. Will Trump try negotiation again? Okay. And if there's a negotiation, we know it won't last, right? It'll only be a matter of time before we're back to war again. Or will Trump finally make the right decision and push forward and try to topple this regime, which is really the only solution here is this regime falling. And again, you can't have the regime falling without the active cooperation. No one's talking about sending American boots on the ground, but we're talking about really enabling and harnessing the Iranian people. 90,000 Iranian people against this regime uh, stands a very good chance. If we're hitting them from above and arming them from below, we have a good chance of succeeding. Again, this is the view of some very, very thoughtful, sophisticated people that I'm just sort of translating their ideas for you. And as for the financial markets really need clarity here. They need strategic vision. They need strategic thinking. Confused policy during the time of warfare just brings, a lot of chaos to financial markets. But if Trump makes a firm decision and goes for victory, ultimately the markets might wobble at first, but ultimately they would reward that decision. And if he really wants to win the midterm elections, maintaining the status quo, going to negotiations, then stepping back from negotiations, returning to low intensity warfare, this confused, chaotic type of decision making, it will not do him any favors when it comes to midterms. But if he makes a firm decision to go for victory, um, that has a much better chance for giving him what he wants, which is a strong election in November. That's really the way to go. It's time to pull off the Band-Aid and get the job done. Okay, guys. Comments, questions?